Shortly after leaving the rest of the group to investigate the bridge, the duo Lee and Luke talked with one another while they walked across through the woods. As they were walking, Luke started a conversation between them both. Hey, sorry to drag you with me. I could really use your eyes, and right now, I don't really trust Nick or anyone at this point to help us. They all seem on edge with the Carver thing. It's been 5 days, Lee reminded him, puzzled to why Carver and his men would be following them for so long. Why the hell would Carver still be following us? Luke took a moment to answer his question. He knew that something that the others didn't, and as much as he really would not want to speak about it, he trusted Lee to keep it a secret. Or so he hoped at least. What's the most important thing in this world? What does everyone want? Even the gangs. What do you think? They're all after. Lee thought about it for a moment at this question of his. And the most important thing in the world, what could it be? Shelter? Friends? People? Food? What could the answer be? Finally, Lee realized there was one option left he could think of, and unfortunately, it was not the answer hoped for. Family, right? It's a tough one out there, with people you can't trust, Luke replied, looking somewhat fearful that he just told Lee. Anyways, can you ask Rebecca, okay? I'm not gonna get into the middle of it. We've all made our mistakes. Done things we all regret. It's not my place to talk about someone else's past, you know? Lee was mocked by this, and now knowing the truth of why Carver was out after them, and the baby Rebecca was carrying was his, or it seemed to at least. Alvin did not seem to know, and if he was, it may devastate him. I hate to break it to you, Luke, but it doesn't seem like we're already in the middle of it. Tell me about it, Luke agreed, knowing what Jesse meant by that. The two continued walking around for a few more seconds, until they finally reached a bridge with the sights. However, they both froze in fear when they saw a sight of two walkers were standing nearby, causing them to stop. One walker was merely standing there, dazing off at the bridge, and as for the second one, he was sitting down by the boulder, unable to move by the looks of it. Luke hummed, trying to figure out what to do next, and how to get past them silently. We can't shoot them, too much noise, but there's only two. Let's take them, Lee said, clutching his rifle, slightly prepared for the attack. I like your style, Luke admitted, with the grins across his face. He and Lee slowly made their way to the nearby boulder and crouched down behind it for cover. I'll take the big one, you get the shorty. I wish we could use guns. Would have been easy, I think. Luke, in all fairness, I'm stronger, so I'll take the big one, Lee replied, looking towards the smaller one resting against a boulder. If you insist, Luke sighed, preparing to sneak up on them quietly. Let's do it. The two then pulled off their melee weapons, and there were a machete for Luke, and the butt off of Lee's rifle. They slowly sneak up to their targets, being as silent as a mouse, until they were in a range. Then with a quick of the flash, they both simultaneously hit the walkers. Luke easily decapitated the small walker, and Lee was able to knock the walker down with his rifle. It collapsed to the ground, and it was still undead for a moment, but it was short-lived when Lee stomped on his foot down on his skull, finally putting it out of its misery. Luke smiled as he rose up his hand and patted him on the back. Nice work, Lee. Thanks, he thanked, flipping his rifle back up to the side. Lee raised a grin on his face before they knew it was time to go. He turned around and began to make their way down the bridge. Lee and Luke carefully made their way down the bridge, sticking to the left of the metal path, when they noticed the wooden tracks looked a little unstable, and sticking to the path was a safe idea. As they got around halfway to the bridge, they saw some sort of handcar on the track, and by it was two walkers. One of the walkers stood up, but the other one began crawling, and both of them snarled and growled as they made their way towards the duo, obviously eager to take a bite to eat. As Luke tried to think of a plan what they were going to do, Lee turned around and saw yet another walker coming towards them. They were trapped. Shit, Luke swore. Looking back and forth, there were four free walkers before he pulled out his machete at the holster and preparing to defend himself. He began moving towards the walker who was coming from behind, thinking that if he killed that one first, then they could run away. Sure, we can't use guns now? Lee inquired, following the younger man's back the way they came, and looked back towards the two walkers, and one was crawling was now walking instead. and this made him twice as dangerous. "Can't risk the noise," Luke warned as he moved towards the single walker. He suddenly felt gravity had pulled him down then he could, and collapsed right through the wooden tracks. The walker he was going to kill ended up falling down with him. "Luke!" Lee panicked as he ran towards the way they came. He quickly jumped down flat on his stomach and sighed in relief to see Luke had not fallen into the river. The walker had fallen on the flat support beam under the bridge, with a broken sharp pole impaled through its shoulder. But as for Luke, he placed his arms around the metal grinder behind him, and placed his legs around the other round grinder in front of him to keep himself up. "Lee, I'm okay, I'm just stuck." Lee had to help him when he could see the walker trying to grab him at any moment. He might break free and might be able to grab him. He reached out for his hand to grab him, but he would have been to be quick before the other two walkers caught up. "Luke, grab my hand!" Luke attempted to grab onto his hand, but at the same time, trying to keep his feet away from the walker and keep himself up. He almost grabbed his hand, but it looked like the other two walkers were moving in. "Behind you!" "Aw, shit!" Lee swore as he quickly jumped with his rifle, raised at the closest walker moving before him, whacked him directly in the head, but did not kill it. He repeatedly did the same tactic, but this time got him in a situation where the walker grabbed onto his rifle. Lee groaned angrily as he attempted to kick the walker back, and he knew he would have to do it quick before the other walker got close enough to attack. Kicking him one more time, Lee had no choice but to let go of his gun to survive. The walker tripped over the railing and pummeled towards the river, taking Lee's weapon with them. Lee quickly shifted his attention back towards the second walker that only stood a couple feet away. He scanned the area for anything he could as a weapon. Then he noticed Luke's machete nearby that may be his only hope of surviving right now. Quickly as a flash, Lee threw himself towards the machete and picked it up into his hands, gripping it slightly. In one quick slash, Lee sliced the walker directly through its head, cutting off its head. He then took a couple deep breaths before the sound of panic erupted in the air, coming from where Luke had fallen. Now that the bridge was clear again, he ran back towards the broken tracks, jumped down onto his stomach, and finally assessed Luke. He picked up a piece of pipe nearby and whacked the pipe against the injured walkers a couple of times, being careful not to drop it, of course. Lee whacked him again, finally finishing him off, before he handed the pipe to Luke, as after he requested it, not sure what he was going to do now. Luke was now beginning to lose his grip, and he placed it across two sections of the grinders, used as a foothold so he could stand, as he was able to grab onto the railroad structure before it slipped under his hoofs. Ugh! Lee grabbed onto his hand, and finally pulled him up to safety. Lee ducked down slightly, taking a few deep breaths, as he just escaped from near-death experience, while Lee merely stood there, expecting a thank you soon. He recovered for a moment and thanked the older man for assistance, realizing that he could have just died if it weren't for Lee. "Thanks, Lee." Lee smiled in response as he handed Luke his machete back, to which he accepted. "Let's keep going," Luke ordered, placing his machete back on his holster. The duo moved towards the handcar and continued their journey over to the other side of the bridge. However, as they were walking, Luke had spotted something in the distance and placed his right arm out of slightly to keep Lee from moving past him. The two watched for a moment as they could see someone moving towards them. It was clearly no walker, and by the looks of it, he was armed. The two could only hope he was just merely a survivor like them. No bandit, no cannibal, or worse, none of Carver's men. "You see him?" Luke inquired, merely watching the figure up ahead making their way towards them. "Yeah," Lee replied, unsure of what to do at this very moment. Now he was unarmed. "I lost my gun. What are we going to do if things get rough?" "Just play it cool," Luke instructed, showing no emotion on his face, and dared not to take the eyes off the stranger. "And you do the talking." "What? Why me?" Lee asked, not sure if he was going to be able to handle this on his own. "Because I don't want to get in a fight," Luke explained, turning his attention towards Lee for a moment. "You're older and you seem smarter. Clem told me that you used to be a teacher, right? Just don't make any sudden moves, and don't piss him off, and don't tell him anything." He paused for a moment, second and unsure if Lee was going to remember all this. "Well, on second thought, maybe I should do the talking." "Well, what should I say?" Lee inquired, beginning to speak in a deeper voice than usual. Hey pal, how are you doing in this zombie world? I don't know. Ask him for directions, Luke suggested, watching the man not too far, but the good thing was he stopped moving, frozen his steps in the center of the bridge. When the man finally spoke to them, raising his voice to hear him say in the distance he was standing in, "Well, who are you?" "Well, who's asking?" Lee replied, and somewhat of him asking the question. "I am," the man replied, not answering his question. "Want to help me out here?" Lee requested, already running out of things to say to the stranger. Luke spoken up after keeping him silent from their little conversation. He asked the first question that popped to mind. "What do you want?" "I saw you coming down and I thought I'd meet you halfway," the man replied, seeming to realize that Luke had his right hand to the pistol holder, preparing to pull out his Glock 17 just in case if things got out of hand. Everyone stood quiet for a moment. All three of them were unsure of what to say. Lee merely stood with his arms folded, Luke still prepared to pull out his Glock 17, and as for the stranger, he stood there, while he was at the center of the bridge. A few seconds later, the man continued marching towards them. Finally, when they got close enough, their sights to reveal that he was carrying an M14 rifle, a similar weapon to the rifle that Lee had moments ago, and the Winchester Model 70 from some of the cabin survivors owned. The man stopped in his tracks yet again, seemingly neutral at the moment, since he did not have his weapon aimed at them. You don't look like assholes. Are you assholes? No offense or anything, but you know it is out there. You run into a lot of assholes. We're just people, Lee assured, hoping that it would be enough to keep the man from shooting them. Fair enough, the man agreed, as he continued walking towards them, finally realizing the strangers were not bad, and seemed friendly for now. He walked closer to them, now just only standing a few feet away from them. Lee and Luke could now see the man in clear view. He looked like an Asian American, and he looked like he in his late 20s, and he did have a small black mustache, wore a gray and black jacket with a hood over his head, and wore dark brownish cargo pants. The man seemed friendly, for now at least, and he seemed to be trust them enough to approach them, without his weapon aiming at them. He spoke in a friendly voice. "You folks heading north like everyone else?" "Everyone else?" Luke quivered, wondering what he meant by everyone else. He suspected that Lee and him were not the only ones who have crossed the bridge past. "I see at least one group a day move here," the man replied, keeping his weapon holstered to them. "You look almost the same. It's like a great migration and dazed and confused." "Do you know Carver?" Lee inquired, unfolding his arms and placing them onto his sides. "Carver?" the man repeated, raising a curious face with an eyebrow arch. "Like George Washington Carver, the peanut guy?" "What?" Lee quivered, puzzled to what he just said out of randomness. "He's a man. Never heard of him, but I know just some peanut butter, though," the man admitted, raising a grin across his face for a moment. He examined the two strangers, noticing the blood and dirt smeared across different parts of their bodies. "I gotta say, you two look like shit. If you need food, I've got some canned food in that station back there." "Well, that's awful nice of you," Luke admitted, placing his hands on his hips, suspecting that this man was going to want something in return. "What's the catch?" "No catch, I've got plenty," the man assured them, making himself look friendlier to the two. "Well, alright then, thank you," Luke thanked, then smiled across his face. He was glad not everyone in this world was bad, and there was some still good people out there. "Hey, no problem. Nice running into friendly faces out here," the man replied, feeling the same way as Luke and Lee, meeting someone friendly for once on this day and age, rather than sickos and thieves. "Like I said, I've got plenty of food and supplies back at the station, if you want." Lee and Luke were puzzled just to why he stopped for a moment, like he saw a ghost. Neither of them had got the chance to speak when the man spoke in the first panicked, annoyed voice. The man's expression changed from that friendly one into a shocked one when he spotted something on the other side of the bridge, running towards him. "What the hell, man?" Luke and Lee turned around to see what the trouble was that the man got all worked up. The duo was shocked to see that Nick was running straight towards them with his rifle in his hand. "What the hell are you doing?" Luke wondered, and annoyed, and confused that he clearly made it to the entire cabin, not across the bridge, until they lit the fire on the other side. Nick had a worried expression on his face, and by the looks of his point of view, He must have mistaken a man to be working for Carver. He aimed his rifle towards him, preparing to open fire. Luke and Lee watch in shock as the man holstered his M14 towards Nick, mistaking him for an enemy too. One of them was gonna shoot unless someone did something fast. No. He's with us, Luke quickly reassured him, raising his hands in the air to prove that they were not enemies, that Nick was just mistaken. He swiftly spun around and waved his hands in the air, trying to signal him to stop. Nick, no! The man did not fully believe them for a moment and continued aiming towards Nick, preparing to pull the trigger on the man. Put it down, he ordered. Lee watched in panic as he shocked as the two men with their weapons and each other. He knew that 100% fact that one of them was going to fire soon and there would be blood split. He quickly then turned towards the man again, trying to assure him that they were not enemies. Don't shoot! Lee was cut off when the shot was fired, and quick as an eye, Luke and he jumped down across the ground, trying to attempt to get out of the fire line. The shot had caused everything to go silent, and the only thing could hear were Lee leaned up when he heard gargling and noises coming from the direction they were heading. He was shocked to see that the man had been directly shot in the side of his neck, blood spitting for a minute, and he held his left hand against it in an attempt to stop the bleeding. The man tumbled back towards the edge of the bridge, aimed his gun up in an attempt to shoot Nick, but he tripped over as Lee and Nuke ran towards him. The two watched his lifeless body hit the water below. Upon impact, it caused a splash. Either he was going to die from blood loss, or the impact of the fall, or drowning. There was nothing they could do to save him. Lee and Luke then turned their attention back towards Nick, and angrily marched towards him. And by the looks of Luke's face, it looked like he wanted to hit him for his actions. Did I hit him? Nick inquired, scanning the bridge, where he did not notice the man either. Where is he? I told you not to shoot, Luke reminded, showing an angered expression towards him. What? Who was that guy? Nick inquired. A shocked face rose upon his face. Why didn't you wait for my signal? Nick inquired. Of course, his voice was slightly raised. Nick, you idiot! Lee judged him, pointing towards him for a moment. He was going to help us, man. How do you know? Nick clashed, not seeming to believe that the older man had spoken to him. Lee kept quiet for now as he folded his arms together, merely watched at the end of the bridge where the rest of the group was making their way down. The two of the friends argued with one another about the victim Nick had just shot without hesitation. Damn it, Nick, I told you not to shoot. How was I supposed to hear you? You made a clear shot. That shot rained for miles. We need to get off this bridge. Let's go. As for now, the trio ended the argument between them until they were safely off the bridge. Lee and Luke continued their way towards the end of the bridge, wanting to get a move on as soon as possible, before it was nighttime, and by the looks of it, the storm was on its way. The second group made it across the bridge. Each and every one of them needed a break from moving non-stop. A couple of them took deep breaths, while others stayed in the small area that were just outside of the small building. Rebecca sat down on the log the second she was over, needing a break from what seemed to be walking from due to her pregnancy. Who the hell was just back there? I don't know, Luke said, able to stand back up at the height that he got his breath. He looked like he had a gun on you, Alvin admitted, speaking to both Luke and Lee. Not everything is what it seems, Lee clashed, looking somewhat annoyed as Nick just murdered an innocent man like that. He shifted his attention towards the younger man, crossing his arms together in the process. You straight up murder him, man. That asshole drew on me, Nick clashed, trying to defend himself from judgment. He was about to shoot. Was he? Luke inquired. I'm telling you, man, he drew first, Nick swore, throwing his arm around mid-sentence. Well, what's look like me? Does it look like? Luke replied, countering his sentence with his own. Look, there's no even point on arguing about it now. Carly joined in on the conversation, crossing her arms together as she looked towards two men. Lee was so disappointed in Nick for what he had done. He still couldn't believe what he'd done, and bad enough, this made him look somewhat responsible that he was trying to look out for him now. He kept quiet for a moment and shook his head both sides. Shut up, Nick. Nick fell silent as he requested, not wanting to make himself look worse for his own sake. What do you see, Lee? Alvin asked Lee, not having him too Lewin angry about the murder Nick had just committed. Was that guy gonna shoot? Fuck you, Luke, and you too, Alvin. Nick swore at them, pointing two of his fingers towards them with an angry expression across his face. You could be on my case the whole week. Look, guy, he wasn't gonna do anything. Lee spoke up in an attempt to finally put an end to all of this. Nick took a look of what Lee just said to him, but nevertheless, he still attempted to defend himself. I know what I saw. Either way, you should have hit one of us, Luke warned, reminding him of how close they came to death today. But I didn't, Nick clashed again, pointing two of his fingers towards them. Luke could only think of one more way to prove Nick of his guilt, and due to this, he could have reminded him of one person they lost today. They did not wish to do it since Pete acted like such a fatherly figure to Luke, but was left no choice. Look, I now Pete is close to you, Nick, but you can't. Don't talk to him about him, Nick warned, not wanting to hear any reminder of his uncle like he never existed. Do you think he was with Carver? Carlos suggested, finally speaking up after he and his daughter had kept quiet from their argument. I don't know. I don't think so, Luke said, knowing the full well of whoever this man was not with Carver. I don't think so, but he fell over. He fell off the damn bridge? Alvin asked, placing both of his hands onto his jacket. We have to keep moving, Carlos reminded them, still not wanting to take any chances with them, just in case if Carver was truly tracking them. I can't, Rebecca replied, placing her hand upon her stomach as the baby kicked from the inside. I need a minute. Fine, Carlos sighed, shifting his attention towards Luke in the moment, needing to speak with him about the situation. Luke, can I talk to you alone? The two men went for a few feet over towards the trees to speak in private. Nick glared towards them for a moment, before he made his way over to the small station, needing to think things over. Alvin turned his attention towards Lee and Clementine for a moment, when seeing his wife weakened by her pregnancy. Hey Lee, Clem, you guys anything to eat? Beck's dying over here. Alvin, I told you I'm fine, Rebecca reassured, placing a hand towards him in denial. We wish you still had those juice boxes, Alvin sighed. Yeah, me too, Sarah agreed. Happy enough they sat down near Rebecca with Carly standing beside her. Sorry I'm out, Clementine apologized, shrugging her shoulders slightly. Yeah, sorry, me too, Lee added, looking over towards a small building. For a moment when he had remembered that the man had mentioned before he was shot in the neck by the hands of Nick and his itchy trigger finger, that man said he had food in the station. Mind checking it for you guys? Alvin requested, scanning the area for a moment to investigate if it was safe or not, since they may not be going anywhere soon. Maybe we could spend the night here. Sure, Lee agreed, wanting to help at least a couple out, since they need to be together now that Rebecca was close to giving birth. I'll go and check it out while you guys wait. Alvin appreciated this from the man that he met not too long ago. He sat down beside his wife with his hands in his pockets, still keeping his attention focused on Lee, of course. Thanks, Lee. Lee smiled in response and prepared to make his way towards a small station. He stopped in his tracks when Clementine moved beside him. Can I go with you? Clementine inquired, and a slight smile across her face when she remembered all the fun things they did together when she was younger. It'll be just like when we invaded the train station. The first time you shot a walker, Lee praised, patting her forehead for a moment, proceeding to make his way inside. Sure, let's go. The duo made their way over towards the entrance of the station, where Nick was sitting on the wooden bench, and by the looks of it, he seemed guilty for what he did, or just maybe thinking about what Lee and Luke had told him. The second Lee and Clementine stood in front of him to check on him, he came out of the most random sentence ever. I had to kill me, Mom. The second, but of course Lee and Clementine watched in shock for a moment to hear what he just said. So he killed his mom? Why is he so angry all the time about his family? after Pete died. That sounds like weird when you say it out loud, huh? Nick admitted, showing a normal expression on his face, and he had no emotions inside of him anymore. Lucas always used to push me around, and I never wanted to go into business with him. I remember when he sold me on it, his big plan, some big frickin' plan. A case of beer, and he just said, Nick, we're always burning daylight, and that was that. After 6 months, we were flat broke, but I didn't care. We were having fun. He paused for a moment and finally got to the point of the story. I wish I was like him. I wish we could have kept moving all the time, but I'm just not built like that. The second he finished his story, Lee and Clementine were both surprised and unsure of what to say, but after hearing this little story of his, Lee was the first to speak up, assuring him that he knew that feeling inside. I know how you feel, Nick. We all lost people we care about. I lost my brother and my parents all when this began. Nick then took note of what he was saying and turned his attention towards over Luke and Carlos, already knowing they were speaking about him. I'm sure they're talking about me right now. Luke's probably going to become the danger of the group. He tried to mimic Carlos in a fake Spanish accent. So who is that guy? I swear he kind of looked like he was holding you and Luke up, so I figured he was with Carver. He did seem nice, Lee admitted. Damn, Nick sighed. If Alvin was in front of me, he takes a shot. What a frickin' mess. Maybe I'm just losing it. I don't know anymore. God, I'm hungry. What time is it? He paused for a moment and looked towards his right wristwatch, angrily punches the wooden bench, realized something he left valuable to him. Damn. What's up, man? I left my watch back at the cabin. It was Pete's, he sighed, holding up to his face. He gave it to me. Lee's face brightened with only just he realized possessed watch. The morning before they had set out to get fish traps, Pete had lent Lee his watch to keep an eye on the time. He took off the watch that had been around his wrist under his shirt, offered it to Nick. Here, Pete's lent me this before we set out. Nick's expression brightened into a happy one as he accepted the watch into his hands. He had finally had a smile on his face, extremely grateful for what Lee had just given him. Thank you. This means thank you, Lee. The second his wristwatch was strapped out of his wrist, Nick then stood up to go talk to Carlos and Luke about what happened. You know what? I'm going to talk with them. Lee and Clementine proceeded to make their way into the small station to search for food that this man mentioned. Hopefully the place was big enough. Maybe they might be able to stay there for the night, just in case that storm hit sooner than they thought.